When the nation's most powerful judge finds himself powerless before the law he's spent a lifetime interpreting, one night will force him to question everything he thought he knew about justice. Chief Justice Marshall Winters sits in his elegant chamber, surrounded by leather-bound law books and framed constitutional documents. At 68, he carries himself with the dignity of someone who has spent 4 decades in the judicial system, rising from public defender to the highest court in the land. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across his polished mahogany desk as he reviews a controversial case file. His clerk, Daniela Rodriguez, knocks softly on the doorframe before entering. Judge Winters, the conference call with the Seventh Circuit has been rescheduled, and Professor Lambert called again about your commencement address at the law school next month. Winters nods without looking up from his papers. Tell Lambert I'll have the speech drafted by next week. And Daniela, I've been thinking about the Thompson case. I'm not satisfied with the precedent we're setting about police procedures. Daniela hesitates. Sir, with all due respect, your draft opinion seems to give law enforcement considerable leeway in these situations. Have you considered the implications for communities that already have strained relationships with police? The Chief Justice finally looks up, his expression a mixture of annoyance and consideration. I've considered every angle, Ms. Rodriguez. The law doesn't bend to accommodate social tensions. Our job is to interpret, not to advocate. He returns to his documents, signaling the end of the discussion. Later that evening, as Winters drives home through an unfamiliar neighborhood after attending a judicial conference, flashing lights appear in his rearview mirror. He pulls over, confused but unconcerned. Officer James Calloway slows his patrol car as he notices the luxury sit-in, moving at an unusually hesitant pace through the residential neighborhood. The vehicle, a sleek, black Lincoln Continental with government plates, seems out of place on these streets, especially at this hour. Calloway has patrolled this beat for 7 years, knows every corner of this neighborhood, and his instincts tell him something isn't right. He's seen this pattern before. Expensive cars crawling through working-class neighborhoods, often casing houses or looking for drug connections. The fact that this one bears government plates could mean anything these days, stolen, borrowed, or legitimate. In his experience, assumptions either way could be dangerous. The sedan takes a slow turn at the intersection, signal blinking meticulously, almost too perfectly. Calloway decides it's time to investigate. He flips on his lights. No siren yet. A standard traffic stop until proven otherwise. Through his windshield, he observes the driver's head jerk slightly in surprise before the vehicle pulls smoothly to the curb. Textbook compliance. Calloway radios in the stop, location, license plate, and vehicle description before exiting his patrol car. Standard procedure dictates caution. Calloway approaches from slightly behind the driver's side, hand resting near his holster, not gripping it, but ready. The neighborhood has seen 3 home invasions in the past month, and an unidentified vehicle moving slowly through these streets at night warrants thoroughness. He adjusts his body camera with his free hand, ensuring it's recording as departmental policy requires. License and registration, he says firmly, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness into the vehicle's interior. The light illuminates an older African-American man in what appears to be expensive clothing, a suit that looks tailored, cufflinks catching the harsh beam. Calloway keeps the light steady, high enough to see the driver's hands, but also partially obscuring his face, a tactical decision that gives officers the advantage of visibility while making identification of the officer more difficult for potentially hostile subjects. The driver speaks with a measured authoritative tone that Calloway has heard before from politicians, lawyers, and others accustomed to deference. Officer, I'm Chief Justice Marshall Winters. I took a detour due to construction on my usual route. The man's hand moves slowly toward the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Calloway tenses immediately. Sir, keep your hands where I can see them, he commands sharply, his free hand moving closer to his weapon. I didn't ask for explanations. I asked for license and registration. The protocol is clear. Establish control of the interaction first. Verify claims second. In his 12 years on the force, Calloway has learned that titles mean nothing in the moment. Everyone from pastors to professors has the potential to become dangerous when stopped. I'm simply getting my identification as requested. Winters responds, his voice carrying the note of indignation now. The dignity that has characterized his 40 years in public service feels suddenly fragile, threatened by the officer's tone and the glaring light that makes it impossible to establish the human connection he's accustomed to commanding effortlessly in his courtroom. Calloway notices the shift in tone, the slight edge of frustration that experience tells him often precedes escalation. Sir, move slowly and tell me what you're reaching for before you do it. His own voice hardens in response, establishing the boundaries of the interaction. In his earpiece, dispatch confirms the vehicle registration belongs to the Federal Judiciary Motor Pool, but that doesn't automatically verify the driver's identity or intentions. Winters withdraws his wallet with deliberate slowness, hyper-aware of how his movements might be perceived. My identification is in my wallet, he says, opening it to reveal his judicial credentials alongside his driver's license. The credential card bears the seal of the United States courts, his photograph, and his title in clear lettering. In any other context, this simple act would immediately transform the dynamic. People typically become deferential, even slightly awed when they realize who he is. But in the harsh glare of the flashlight, with tension already established, the effect is lost. Calloway takes the wallet, examining the credentials with proper skepticism. Fakes exist for everything these days, and the darkness makes verification difficult. Remain in the vehicle, sir, he says, stepping back slightly to radio in the name, and check the identification more thoroughly under the patrol car's interior light. The process feels excruciatingly slow to Winters, who sits immobilized by a mixture of disbelief and growing realization. Minutes pass. Inside the car, Chief Justice Winters contemplates the constitutional implications of this stop. Reasonable suspicion based on what? Driving slowly through a neighborhood, taking an unfamiliar route, being in the wrong place. The legal frameworks he's helped construct over decades of jurisprudence suddenly feel abstract, theoretical constructs far removed from this immediate visceral experience of powerlessness. Outside, Officer Calloway speaks quietly into his radio, describing the credentials that look legitimate but require verification given the hour and circumstances. His training emphasizes caution. High-ranking officials don't typically drive themselves through residential neighborhoods at night without security details. Something still doesn't fit. He requests backup as a standard precaution for an unusual situation. When Calloway returns to the vehicle, his demeanor has shifted subtly. The credentials appear genuine, but department protocol for handling high-profile individuals requires supervisor presence. Sir, I'll need you to step out of the vehicle while we complete our verification process. This request, technically not legally required if the stop is merely for a traffic infraction, marks a significant escalation. Inside the car, Winters feels a surge of indignation. Officer, is that really necessary? I've provided identification confirming I'm a federal judge. I'm simply driving home from a late judicial conference. His tone remains measured, professional, the same voice that has questioned attorneys in the highest court in the land, but carries an unmistakable note of authority that has rarely failed him before. Calloway perceives this as resistance, perhaps even an attempt to intimidate a law enforcement officer using position and privilege. Sir, please exit the vehicle now. His tone leaves no room for negotiation. We need to complete our investigation, which includes ensuring you're not under duress and that no one is using your vehicle without authorization. The mention of investigation strikes Winters like a physical blow. Throughout his career, he has signed countless warrants, approved numerous investigative procedures, always believing in the system's fundamental fairness when properly executed. Now, as he slowly opens his car door and steps into the cool night air, he feels the ground beneath his judicial philosophy shifting. 2 additional patrol cars arrive on scene, their lights creating a disorienting strobe effect that bathes the street in alternating blue and red. Neighbors have begun to appear in doorways and windows, drawn by the commotion. Winters feels their eyes on him as he stands beside his government vehicle, no longer the Chief Justice, but simply a suspect in an unspecified investigation. "Sir, place your hands on the roof of the vehicle," Calloway instructs, following standard procedure for suspect control while awaiting supervisor arrival and final verification. The request, delivered in the same tone one might use for any routine traffic stop, carries devastating implications for a man who has spent his life on the other side of the justice system. "Officer, this is completely unnecessary. I am the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court," Winters says, his voice steady but tension evident in every syllable. The absurdity of the situation, that he must prove his identity and innocence on a random street corner, begins to penetrate the protective layers of privilege and position that have insulated him for decades. Calloway remains unmoved. "Sir, you can explain everything once we've secured the scene. Right now, I need compliance." His training emphasizes control above all else. Situations turn dangerous when officers lose command presence. The title means nothing until verified. The procedure remains the same regardless of who the subject claims to be. With profound reluctance, Winters places his hands on the roof of his vehicle. The cooled metal beneath his palms seems to conduct more than temperature. It transmits the reality of his situation with shocking clarity. From his new position, he can see the growing audience of onlookers, can feel the weight of their assumptions. In this moment, without his robes, without the trappings of his office, he is simply another black man being detained by police, his explanations dismissed, his authority nullified. The arriving officers approach with practiced caution, flanking Calloway as he explains the situation in clipped, professional language. One officer, Sergeant Lisa Ramirez, listens carefully before studying the credentials Calloway hands her. Her eyes widen slightly as she processes the information, immediately grasping the potential implications of the situation. "Has he been searched?" she asks quietly. "Not yet, waiting for verification before proceeding." Calloway responds, his voice betraying no emotion despite the growing realization that this situation could become extraordinarily complicated regardless of outcome. Ramirez approaches Winters with a markedly different demeanor, professional, but not aggressive. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. We're working to verify your identity as quickly as possible. Can you provide any additional forms of identification, or perhaps someone we could contact who could confirm who you are?" The change in tone is slight but noticeable to Winters, who has spent a lifetime analyzing nuance and subtext. "My chambers can be reached at the number on my business card in my wallet. My clerk, Daniela Rodriguez, is likely still working and can confirm my identity. You may also contact the Supreme Court Police, who can verify that I am who I claim to be." Ramirez nods, taking the information while gesturing subtly for Winters to remain in position. The protocol hasn't changed. Verification must be completed before the situation can be resolved, but her instincts tell her this requires delicate handling. She steps away to make the necessary calls, leaving Winters still standing with his hands on his vehicle, watched by the remaining officers and the growing audience of neighborhood residents. Time distorts in moments of crisis. For Winters, the 15 minutes that follow stretch into what feels like hours. He remains perfectly still, unwilling to give any officer reason to escalate further. In this position, hands splayed on his car roof, feet slightly apart, he contemplates the legal decisions he's authored regarding police detention procedures. How many times has he ruled that temporary discomfort was not equivalent to constitutional violation? How often has he deferred to officer judgment in assessing reasonable suspicion? The abstract legal concepts he's wielded throughout his career suddenly acquire concrete, personal meaning. From the corner of his eye, he watches Sergeant Ramirez return from her patrol car, her expression now transformed by recognition and concern. She approaches the other officers first, speaking in hushed tones that Winters cannot hear. Whatever she says changes the atmosphere immediately. Calloway's posture shifts, tension giving way to something that might be uncertainty, or perhaps even apprehension. Ramirez approaches Winters directly. "Your Honor, you're free to go. We've confirmed your identity with both your chambers and the Supreme Court Police. I sincerely apologize for the detention and any inconvenience." Her words are professional, but carry an undercurrent of genuine concern about the implications of having detained the nation's highest-ranking judicial officer. Winters straightens, reclaiming his full height and dignity as he turns to face the officers. For a moment, he considers unleashing the full force of his authority, demanding badge numbers, threatening consequences, exercising the power that his position affords him. The words form in his mind with practiced precision: constitutional violations, procedural overreach, abuse of discretion. But something stops him. Perhaps it's the watching neighbors, still observing from windows and doorways. Perhaps it's the younger officer who stands slightly apart from the others, looking genuinely troubled by what has transpired. Or perhaps it's the sudden, overwhelming awareness that his experience tonight, humiliating and unjust as it felt, was tempered by eventual recognition, by the special treatment that would certainly follow, by the apologies already being offered. "Officer Calloway," Winters says instead, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of 4 decades of judicial authority, "I believe you were doing what you thought necessary given the circumstances. However, I would appreciate the return of my identification and an explanation of what specific behavior prompted this stop in the first place." Calloway hands back the wallet, his expression carefully neutral. "Sir, your vehicle was moving unusually slowly through a residential area that has experienced several recent break-ins. The government plates alongside the unusual driving pattern warranted investigation under department." The grandfather clock in the foyer chimes 3 times as Chief Justice Marshall Winters sits motionless in his study, illuminated only by a single desk lamp that casts long shadows across leather-bound law volumes and framed constitutional documents. His bow tie hangs undone around his neck, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled in a way that would shock his colleagues. On the antique desk before him rests a crystal tumbler containing 3 fingers of bourbon, more than he would typically allow himself on a working night. Next to the glass, his judicial credentials lie discarded, the gold emblem catching the light occasionally, as if to remind him of its presence. The events of the evening replay in his mind with judicial precision, each moment catalogued, analyzed, and reconsidered from multiple angles. The flashlight in his eyes, the command to place his hands on the vehicle, the eyes of neighbors watching from darkened windows, the cool metal of his car beneath his palms as he stood displayed like a common criminal. Most disturbing was the recognition that washed over him as he stood there, that his judicial robes, his lifetime of achievement, his carefully constructed identity had dissolved into irrelevance in the face of immediate, unquestioning authority. His phone has been ringing periodically for the past hour. The commissioner of police, the mayor, 2 Supreme Court colleagues, his son from Chicago. Word travels quickly in circles of power, each call representing different facets of damage control already spinning into motion. Winters has answered none of them, preferring instead this rare moment of absolute solitude with his thoughts. The bourbon burns pleasantly as he takes another measured sip, allowing himself to fully inhabit the discomfort of his revelations rather than rushing to resolve them. The Thompson case file sits open before him, the draft opinion he had been so certain of just 12 hours ago, now seeming foreign, as if written by a different man entirely. In many ways, it was. The legal framework remains sound, his analysis of precedent meticulous as always, but the fundamental assumptions underlying his reasoning now seem hollowed out, built upon a theoretical understanding of justice that had never been tested in the crucible of personal experience. His phone rings again. This time, the specialized tone indicates his longtime colleague and friend, Justice Elena Torres. Winters sighs deeply, knowing that of all his connections, Elena deserves a response. They have served together for 15 years, often finding themselves on opposite sides of police power cases, her perspective shaped by her previous work as a public defender, while his had been informed by his time as a prosecutor before ascending to the bench. "Elena," he answers, his voice betraying more weariness than he intends. "Marshal," she responds immediately, concern evident in her tone. "I've been trying to reach you for an hour. The commissioner called me personally to explain what happened. This is outrageous. They had no right." "They had every right, Elena," Winters interrupts, his voice quiet but firm. "At least according to the very precedents I've helped establish." The words taste bitter as they leave his mouth, but the truth in them cannot be denied. Silence hangs between them before Torres responds. "What are you saying, Marshal?" Winters rises from his desk, phone in hand, and moves to the window overlooking the manicured garden of his Georgetown home. "I'm saying that tonight I experienced firsthand what we've been adjudicating in the abstract for decades. The legal framework I've helped construct grants officers extraordinary discretion in conducting investigative stops. I've consistently upheld their authority to detain, question, and search based on what we've termed reasonable suspicion, a standard so elastic it can be stretched to cover nearly any circumstance." "Marshal, you were profiled," Torres states plainly, never one to soften difficult truths. "You were treated this way because despite your position, despite your credentials, you were still a black man in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time." He finishes for her. "Yes, I'm aware of the dynamics at play, Elena. But what troubles me most deeply isn't that officers fail to recognize me. It's that I've spent my career ensuring they didn't have to." He hears her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. They have argued these points for years in conference rooms and through competing draft opinions, but never has he conceded ground so completely. "The Thompson opinion," she says, connecting the dots immediately, "will require substantial revision," he confirms, glancing back at the draft on his desk, "along with a re-examination of our entire approach to Fourth Amendment jurisprudence as it relates to police discretion." Torres is quiet for a moment, processing the implications. When she speaks again, her voice carries a gentleness rarely heard in their professional interactions. "One experience doesn't invalidate a lifetime of careful jurisprudence, Marshal. You shouldn't feel pressured to overcorrect based on an emotional response." The comment stings precisely because it echoes arguments he himself has made countless times when colleagues have shared personal experiences that contradicted his more conservative legal positions. How often had he dismissed such perspectives as anecdotal or emotionally driven, rather than grounded in legal principle? "What I experienced tonight wasn't an anomaly, Elena. It was the system working exactly as designed. Exactly as I have helped to design it." Winters returns to his desk, setting down his bourbon with a decisive click against the wood. "The difference is that most citizens who experience what I did tonight don't have the commissioner of police calling to apologize. They don't have the mayor worried about political fallout. They don't have the luxury of righteous indignation protected by position and privilege." Torres sighs, recognizing the shift in her colleague's perspective as genuine rather than reactive. "So what happens now?" "Now," Winters says, scanning the Thompson brief with new eyes, "I have work to do." After ending the call, Winters sits in contemplative silence for several more hours, making occasional notes on legal pads as thoughts crystallize into actionable judicial principles. By the time dawn breaks over Washington, D.C., casting the first golden rays across the National Mall visible from his study window, Chief Justice Marshall Winters has outlined not just a revised opinion for Thompson, but the foundation for a significant evolution in his judicial philosophy. 3 days later, Winters calls an unusual private meeting with his clerks in his Supreme Court chambers. The 4 brilliant young attorneys, selected from the nation's top law schools and representing the pinnacle of legal scholarship, enter with obvious curiosity about the unexpected gathering. Daniela Rodriguez, his senior clerk who has worked with him longest, immediately notices the change in her mentor's demeanor. Gone is the characteristic certainty that typically defines his interactions. In its place is something more measured, more open. I want to revisit every police procedure case we've ruled on in the past 5 years. Winters announces without preamble, once they are seated in the comfortable consultation area of his chambers. And I'm completely rewriting my Thompson opinion. The clerks exchange glances, surprise evident in their expressions. The Thompson draft had been nearly complete, Winters having dismissed their concerns about its expansion of qualified immunity protections for officers. For him to restart the process entirely is unprecedented. Daniela looks surprised but pleased. "What changed your mind, sir?" Winters sets down his pen and looks at his team, considering how to articulate the profound shift that has occurred within him. "Experience is a powerful teacher, Ms. Rodriguez. I spent one evening without the protection of my title, and it changed everything I thought I knew about justice in practice versus justice in theory." He explains the incident in clinical detail, presenting it as he would a case study rather than a personal ordeal. The clerks listen with increasing discomfort as they recognize the implications, not just for their current work, but for the legal frameworks they've helped construct under his guidance. The law as written provides expansive protections for citizens against unreasonable search and seizure. Winters continues, pacing slowly before the wall of windows overlooking the Capitol. But the law as interpreted, as I have helped interpret it, has systematically eroded those protections in favor of granting law enforcement ever greater discretion and immunity from consequences. James Chen, his youngest clerk, speaks up hesitantly. "Your Honor, are you suggesting we revisit the fundamental balance between police authority and individual rights across our entire jurisprudence?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Mr. Chen." Winters confirms, his gaze steady, beginning with Thompson, which will now emphasize that qualified immunity was never intended to shield officers from accountability for clear violations of established rights. The implications of this shift ripple through the room. Supreme Court opinions don't merely resolve individual cases, they establish precedent that shapes the administration of justice throughout the nation for decades to come. A single majority opinion can empower or constrain thousands of daily interactions between citizens and authorities. "This won't be popular with many of your colleagues on the bench," Daniela observes carefully, "or with the law enforcement communities that have long counted you as an ally." Winters nods, acknowledging the political realities. "I'm not interested in popularity, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm interested in getting this right." He returns to his desk, gathering several files. "I've drafted a new framework for Thompson that maintains appropriate protections for officers making split-second decisions in genuinely dangerous situations, while significantly narrowing immunity for stops based primarily on discretionary factors." The clerks accept the materials with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, recognizing they are witnessing a pivotal moment in their mentor's distinguished career. As they depart to begin the substantial work of research and drafting that lies ahead, Daniela lingers behind. "Your Honor," she begins, choosing her words carefully, "I've worked with you for 3 years now, and I've never seen you reverse direction on a major opinion like this." Winters considers her observation. "Ms. Rodriguez, when I interviewed you for this clerkship, you told me that your motivation for pursuing law was witnessing your brother's experience with the criminal justice system. How a simple misunderstanding escalated into charges that affected his educational opportunities, his employment prospects, his entire future." Daniela nods, surprised he remembers the personal story she had shared during her interview. "I listened to your story then and found it moving." Winters continues, "But I maintained what I considered a necessary professional distance from such personal narratives. I believed emotional distance was essential to sound jurisprudence." He pauses, meeting her gaze directly. "I was wrong. Justice that fails to consider the lived human experience of those subject to its power isn't justice at all. It's merely the administration of rules divorced from their impact." In the weeks that follow, Chief Justice Winters initiates a transformation that extends far beyond his chambers. He schedules meetings with community advocates he previously dismissed as too agenda-driven, sitting for hours in church basements and community centers in neighborhoods far from the marble halls of the Supreme Court. He listens more than he speaks, accumulating perspectives that had been absent from his consideration throughout his career. The revised Thompson opinion, when finally issued, sends shockwaves through legal communities nationwide. While maintaining appropriate protections for law enforcement officers operating in good faith, it establishes clearer boundaries for what constitutes reasonable suspicion and significantly narrows qualified immunity in cases where officers extend stops beyond their original justification. More revolutionary still is the opinion's explicit acknowledgement that judicial interpretation must consider not just the theoretical rights granted by the Constitution, but how those rights function in practice for all citizens regardless of race, class, or social position. 6 months after that fateful night, Chief Justice Winters stands at the podium of Georgetown Law School's commencement ceremony. The graduating class before him represents the future of American jurisprudence, the judges, prosecutors, defenders, and scholars who will interpret and apply the principles he has helped shape. He looks down at his prepared remarks, a carefully crafted address about the importance of precedent and the evolutionary nature of constitutional interpretation. He sets the papers aside. The law is not just words on paper, he tells the graduates, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. It lives in the spaces between people, in moments of vulnerability and power. I spent my career interpreting its letter while sometimes forgetting its spirit. True justice requires both. It requires us to remember that behind every case file is a human being whose dignity deserves our protection. The students listen intently as he continues, speaking now without notes, sharing not just legal philosophy, but wisdom earned through humbling personal experience. The greatest danger facing those of us privileged to interpret and apply the law is not that we will deliberately pervert justice, but that we will administer injustice while genuinely believing we are doing right. The insulation of position, the comfort of consensus among like-minded colleagues, the abstract nature of appellate decision-making. All these create distance between our rulings and their real-world impact. Winters pauses, surveying the faces before him. Young, diverse, eager to make their mark on a system many of them enter with reformist ambitions that will be tested by institutional pressures. I challenge you to resist this distance, whether you become prosecutors or defenders, corporate attorneys or public interest advocates. Remember that legal principles exist to serve human needs, not the reverse. Maintain what I failed to for too long, a connection to the lived reality of those most vulnerable to the power of the system you are now entering. As applause fills the hall, Winters feels neither pride nor accomplishment, but something rarer in his experience, genuine humility before the magnitude of the work that remains. His transformation from theoretical jurist to experiential advocate represents just one mind changed among many that must follow if justice is to become more than an aspiration. That evening, as he reviews applications for the coming term's clerkships, Winters makes another departure from his traditional approach. Rather than selecting exclusively from a handful of elite law schools that have always fed his chambers, he includes candidates from institutions serving communities traditionally underrepresented in the judiciary. Their personal statements speak of experiences with the legal system that would have seemed irrelevant to his selection process a year earlier, but now appear essential to the balanced administration of justice he seeks to establish. A notification appears on his computer screen. The Commissioner of Police requesting a meeting to discuss implementation of the Thompson standards in departmental training. Another follows shortly after, an invitation to address the Judicial Conference on experiential jurisprudence and constitutional interpretation. The momentum of change continues building, each small shift in perspective and policy contributing to a larger evolution in how justice is conceptualized and delivered. Winters accepts both invitations, knowing that the transformation of institutions requires sustained effort across many fronts. The encounter that catalyzed his personal reckoning represented not an endpoint, but the beginning of a more profound understanding of justice, one that acknowledges the vast distance between constitutional ideals and lived reality, and commits to bridging that gap through humility, openness to experience, and the courage to evolve even after decades of certainty. As night falls over Washington, Chief Justice Marshall Winters stands at the window of his chambers, looking out at the illuminated dome of the Capitol. The document framed on his wall, his oath to administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, seems less like a completed achievement and more like a daily aspiration requiring constant vigilance and willingness to recognize one's own limitations. The reckoning that began with a traffic stop continues with each case that crosses his desk, each opinion he drafts, each interaction with the system he now sees through transformed eyes. The journey toward justice, he has learned, is not a straight path, but a constant process of course correction, guided by both principle and experience, neither complete without the other.